Hello, welcome to 8.9 News. I'm Finlo Costain. A report by North Star Transition says that there is an urgent need for large-scale funding of nature-based solutions across many UK landscapes. Vicky Vanderstichele worked on the report. I asked her where large-scale funding for nature-based solutions should come from.
At North Star Transition, we want to see landscapes transform from degenerative to regenerative in all its aspects, from farming to transport and healthcare. And we want to create deep systemic change. And nature-based solutions are an aspect of this transformation. And we understand nature-based solutions very broadly to include natural flood defences, regenerative agriculture, and so for a very broad base. And we, as you suggested, we have a deficit in funding from nature-based solutions required to pull us out of the multiple crises we are facing. So we desperately need to increase our investment in nature-based solutions. And so we need funding from a lot of different quarters, from both public and private. And the private money includes philanthropic or charity investment, but also financial institutions such as banks and pension funds and insurers.
Should government and taxpayers and the private sector be paying for different things?
So yeah, that's a really interesting and relevant question. And from the financial institutions perspective, which is what we are trying to look at North Star Transition, they have a very sort of specific thing that they want to invest in, and they want to invest in things that produce the right level of return for them. Financial institutions have what's called fiduciary duties, which means that they have to have a certain level of return for their stakeholders, and they won't invest in things which don't provide that return. And this is historically where the government and philanthropic funding has stepped in to invest in those things which are essentially, for financial institutions, uninvestable. However, for North Star Transition, this poses a problem because we want to create interventions in the landscape on a broad scale, which really will transform the landscape. And if we have financial institutions which are hesitating to invest in certain interventions which are necessary, then in our view, the project will not provide the regeneration which is required. So this is where our report comes in, where we want to actually aggregate all these interventions together, which means that financial institutions aren't able to cherry pick only the investments which they believe will provide a return. This is also where blended finance comes in. So the government, the public sector coming together with the private sector to invest in all the interventions necessary for a regenerative change to the landscape.
Since the work of Dieter Helm and the Natural Capital Committee, there's been a relative consensus over what defines public or private goods. This agreement seems to have become more strained recently, with food production now being thought of much more frequently as both a public and a private good. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, so that's a very interesting question, and we at North Star Transition are really focused on what stakeholders want in the landscape. And food production is something which people feel very close to, and it's an extremely important part of everyone's life. So the extent to which we can keep stakeholder ownership over food production, we want to encourage that. We do not want to see a situation where that is taken out of the power to create food is taken out of people's hands.
In the North Star report, you say that investment tends to be project-based rather than place-based. What's the difference and how can change happen?
Let me first explain what we mean by project-based and place-based. What we mean by project-based is investments that are quite discrete and piecemeal. So this actually happens quite a lot in the UK at the moment. You'll see everywhere that nature-based solutions are happening. But the problem that North Star Transition has with these nature-based solutions is that they're great in principle, but they are often very limited in the impacts that they have. Because what we really need to have is a broader look at what's going on and transformation at scale. So not just simple, limited project-based solutions, but place-based solutions. And what we mean by that is projects that operate to transform an entire landscape. On the one hand, large-scale place-based investments are much more attractive to institutional investors because a project-based, nature-based solution will probably be a ticket size of maybe £1 million, £2 million, which just isn't attractive to institutional investors who are used to, projects of £1 billion in size. So as a minimum, they probably want to invest about 200 million in something. So this means that a place-based approach is more attractive in one way. But the flip side of that is that the setup costs for that place-based intervention is much higher. The risks are multiplied manyfold, and the time it takes to actually put together all these interventions to create a plan is very high. So it takes a lot of time to put this together, which makes it less attractive for investors. So it's sort of the balance of these two things makes it easy on the one hand, but also harder on the other. And that is the issue that North Star Transition is tackling at the moment.
In your research dialogues, what did investors identify as the chief risks to nature-based investment?
So yeah, we would see the chief risks as threefold. The first is construction and operational risks. The second is regulatory risks, and the third is reputational risks. So construction and operational risks are those involved with creating the project and then running the project. It's sometimes very difficult to foresee what those costs will be in creating the project and running the project. And as those costs increase, then the revenue for the financial institution decreases. So any impact on those initial costs will end up impacting the viability of the project. Then the second issue is the regulatory risks. At the moment, we have a lot of moving parts in the regulatory landscape, and things are really at the developmental stage. And a project which might last 10, 20, 30 years, it's really difficult for financial institutions to know what the regulatory landscape will be in 20 years' time and whether their project is still something which is accepted by the regulatory landscape. And then the third issue, the reputational risk, is, financial institutions are very concerned about their reputation and getting involved in a project which might not end up being as successful as they'd hoped could really impact their reputation. For example, we've seen recently a lot of companies who have done carbon sequestration have run across issues with that and have overpromised the amount of carbon they're sequestering. And that kind of reputational impact is massive, and financial institutions are really wary of getting involved with projects that could impact them in that area.
It seems as though reputational risk will reduce through experience and improved science, and that the operational risks could come down as implementation knowledge is acquired and solutions better understood. The regulatory risk seems like the biggest challenge, because knowing how governments are going to legislate and regulate globally and nationally in such an important and emerging area, and the impacts that this might have at a farm, landscape or investor level, that's difficult over a 5-year period, let alone a 30-year period.
Yes, the regulatory risk is a challenge. And we hear that again and again from people saying, we need regulation from the government to help us do this. We need to know what the parameters are and what the, how the government will see this. But the issue is with regulation is that it usually follows after the fact, and it's very slow to actually bring regulation to the table. I mean, it could take 5 years or something for the government to enact a bill to solve these kind of issues. So from our perspective, from North Star Transition's perspective, the interventions need to happen now, and we need to work with what we have, and the regulatory landscape will follow.
Looking forward, what are the key barriers as you see it in terms of what the market needs to resolve?
So as you may have, as I've hinted at throughout this whole interview, there are a huge range of issues which are barriers to unlocking finance for nature-based solutions. But the key one for North Star Transition is that the system is currently just not set up to recognise and support nature-based solutions at scale. So just to give an example, if a government agency wants to build flood defences in the form of grey infrastructure, they know exactly how to go about doing that. There's a whole host of economic actors who are prepared to help them do that. There are banks who can fund the creation of this. They've done this multiple times before. They know exactly what they need to do for that. There are engineering firms who have specifications for these for this great infrastructure. There are insurance companies who are happy to insure if the flood defences can hold up or not. And then if something goes wrong with the flood defences, the government can sue someone for that wrong and perhaps get some of its money back. But in contrast to the whole ecosystem which has been created around grey infrastructure, for nature-based solutions, that just doesn't exist. Nature-based solutions only raise questions. So, what are the specifications for nature-based solutions? There's nothing that's been agreed, by regulatory bodies. And who is going to build the nature-based solution? Again, there's a limited visibility of that. How will it be funded? I mean, that's what we at North Star Transition are looking at, and it's still such a grey area. And how will the insurance operate for these nature-based solutions? Insurance companies just don't have experience with insuring nature-based solutions. And then what are the co-benefits to that, and how can we harness those co-benefits? Again, these things are all questions which perhaps have some answers, but it's still very nascent and we're still working through all those. And then, so if a government agency is faced with choosing between a nascent area where there are more questions than answers, or something which they're very used to doing, then the dial is always shift towards grey infrastructure rather than nature-based solutions. So trying to change that systemic approach is fundamental to bringing more financing for nature-based solutions.
It seems as though the financial sector is going to have to devise a wholly different approach to specifying investments in nature-based solutions, because nature simply doesn't behave consistently in the way that bricks and concrete do.
Yeah, I would say that we see the system as being an issue at North Star Transition, and that there needs to be a wholesale different approach. Where that will come from and how that will manifest is yet to be seen. I mean, we're hoping that increasing technology, increasing interest in this area will reduce the risks for financial institutions and everyone getting involved with nature-based solutions. But we agree that there needs to be a different approach, and whether that will come from financial institutions or be pushed on them by governments is yet to be seen.
That was Vicky Vanderstichele from North Star Transition. More news on our website 8.9.com. That's all for now. We're back soon. Thanks for watching.